whistleblower.
Shoplifting, failing to pay child support.
They can paint everything with that brush. Are you a businessman or are you a newsman? Most expensive corporate malfeasance case in U.S. history. Yes. Is it newsworthy? Yes. Are we gonna air it? Of course not. Why? Because he's not telling the truth. No, because he is telling the truth.
안녕하십니까. SBS 그것이 알고 싶다를 진행하는 김상중입니다. 세상을 제대로 볼 수 있는 냉철한 시선은 바로 저널리스트의 깨어있는 호기심에서 시작이 될 것입니다. 이번 SDF2015에서 이 시대의 저널리스트, 전설적인 탐사보도의 거장이 강연을 하신다니 무척 기대가 됩니다. 담배 회사 내부 고발자와 방송사 간의 갈등을 다룬 영화 인사이더의 실제 주인공이기도 한 로엘 버그만 교수의 탐사 저널리즘의 미래. 여러분, 미스터 로엘 버그만입니다.
로엘 버그만 교수를 무대 위로 소개하겠습니다. 여러분 큰 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다. 어서 오십시오. 감사합니다.
Thank you. Well, I decided after being here for a day or so and listening to bring my high-tech device with me. It's right here. And I guess I'm the antidote to the question of fiction. As many of you know, my specialty is nonfiction, what we call investigative reporting. But I did bring a movie with me, as you saw, and it's not a movie about outer space or a fictional potential situation. It was a movie based on an experience that I had that I'd like to share with you. But I'd also first like to thank SBS, in particular Chong-Ai Lee, who invited me here, tried to get me here for a number of years, and I'm really happy that you gave me the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about news today in the media industry and why something like the movie The Insider provides an insight into the kinds of content, and I've also heard a lot of content discussion in the last day or so, why content is so important and how critical thinking, curiosity, conscious curiosity is key to the industry and the business of news. And let me say to begin that when I talk about the business of news, you know, I'm not from the business side. I've spent almost a half a century in gathering information, in asking questions, and developing news stories. And the kinds of stories that I try to develop and have specialized in add to the body of knowledge, they provide things that we didn't know before. And what happened in the 20-odd years ago, when I first became aware of a gentleman inside the tobacco industry, what happened is I realized that I was going to be talking to somebody that I had never talked to before, that I was going to try to take someone who was from inside the corporate world and bring them out into the public light. In my career, I've put mafioso on camera, I've put CIA agents on camera, I've put arms dealers on camera and written about them, but I've never been able to get a corporate officer from inside a major corporation to talk about what people really say to each other when they're alone. And in this case, it was the tobacco industry. Now, the tobacco industry, we knew at the time, this is 20 years ago, we knew that if you used their product as directed, it would kill you, but it was legal. We also knew that they spent fortunes trying to get people to stop talking about the negative effects of tobacco. So my goal in this case was to get a corporate officer to talk about the documents that are already emerging from inside the industry and ask the question, as investigative reporters or any good reporter would do, what do you talk about between each other about the fact of whether or not your product will actually kill people? And in this case, I found someone who not only had the access, had been there, but was willing to talk. Now, the movie is about what transpired next. As Al Pacino, and by the way, you may have noticed I'm not Al Pacino. He's a little older than I am, and someone backstage said I'm a lot better looking than he is. But Al Pacino, Russell Crowe, who played Dr. Jeffrey Wigand, the insider, Michael Mann, the producer-director, Eric Roth, who wrote the screenplay, I think did a brilliant job pulling together what was going on. What was going on was I got someone to tell the truth about what was happening. That was the problem, the company told us. If he had lied to us, as is explained in the movie, if he had told us things that were not true, the company couldn't have sued us. But they said because he had got corporate secrets, trade secrets, and was revealing them to us, they could sue us for interfering with their business, basically, what they called tortious interference. None of us had ever heard that before. So what transpired after that was not just that we had a story about a multinational corporation that was having a dramatic effect on the public health, but we had a media company that was going along with suppressing the story. As it turned out, CBS at the time was about to be involved in a large merger. Massive litigation, lawsuits could have interfered with that. And by the way, the family that owned CBS also owned a large tobacco company. So there were a lot of things going against us. But what came about in the end was something that I think formed my own future and has helped to shape a lot of what is currently going on in the world of in-depth public interest investigations. I had to make a choice on a given day. I talked to the head of the news division at CBS and I said, so we've heard from the lawyers. They say we shouldn't run the story. What does CBS, what does the management say? And he replied, the corporation will not risk its assets on this story because it's true. So I then crossed a line. And it's an ethical decision, a decision many of you who work in the news business, maybe here at SBS, have similar standards. You rarely, if ever, talk to anyone about the story you're working on. Strictly forbidden. And you don't talk to people in other news organizations. We're competing. The information you have, that belongs to your employer. But the stance that my employer took at the time was something I couldn't ethically go along with. The idea was, cut the guy loose, the company will find out he talked, they'll sue him, he has a family, he has no way to defend himself, but that's his problem. And so I made a decision to do something that today is actually becoming very commonplace. I decided to talk to our competitors. I decided to talk to my colleagues at different news organizations and give away our story. I decided to let it be known what was going on inside CBS. And the result is chronicled in this movie. The result is the story came out. The result is the tobacco industry wound up settling massive litigation for initially $210 billion. And certain things changed in terms of the use, advertising, and restrictions on tobacco. So in the end, there was a positive outcome to all of this. And a movie got made. And you guys invited me here. And now I'm here to tell you that what I saw after I left CBS, what I experienced for about 5 or 6 years afterwards, is now becoming viral throughout particularly the in-depth investigative reporting world. What I started doing after I left was to marry video and print and use the then fledgling internet to put files and information and make it available to other reporters, and do that with the New York Times, public television, working out of my base at the University of California at Berkeley. And what we wound up doing was a series of stories that lasted for over a decade, that won all kinds of awards, but also set various precedents. And when it came about that the massive leaks started happening from inside the national security community of the United States, when millions of documents started to be given to people like Julian Assange by Chelsea Manning, who was then in the military, or by Edward Snowden to The Guardian and some freelancers. By the time that started to happen, the concept, not just of doing critical stories and critical thinking, the concept of having content that's in the public interest, that's a public good, was joined with the concept of different news organizations collaborating on stories that were so big, like, for example, recently, the leak of millions of documents from inside HSBC Bank, bigger than any news organization could possibly handle, in part because of this digital revolution. Various organizations have come together and collaborated together on the same story. There's a new phenomenon now of sharing the scoop. You know, I remember the days when people didn't talk to each other in the same newsroom. In fact, I remember a reporter at the New York Times who, when I'd call him up, would get under his desk so no one in the newsroom could hear what he was saying. We didn't trust each other. We didn't figure out ways to come together, to work on stories, and not only to work on stories and get a wider coverage for those stories, but also to work on stories and defend each other against whatever consequences there were. And in some cases, there are many. The other thing that this has allowed me to do personally is to look into various questions that have occurred to me with my curiosity and get some interesting answers from people. And I want to show you a couple of clips. Right after 9/11, there was the question, why did 15 of the 19 hijackers come from Saudi Arabia? It didn't take much research to figure out that the Al-Qaeda and all the other dissident groups in Saudi Arabia were very upset about the question of corruption in Saudi Arabia and the use of the assets of the country by the royal family for their own personal, if you will, gain. And so I arranged to interview the well-known then Saudi ambassador to the United States, Bandar bin Sultan, a man who was a source I knew of leaks to many journalists in Washington. And I asked the journalist before I went to the interview, what's the one question you never ask this source of yours? And they said, we never ask him about corruption. And here's his answer.
You know what? I would be offended if I thought we had a monopoly on corruption.
Prince Bandar would not give us an interview today, but he did in 2001, when Frontline asked him about corruption and the Saudi royal family.
But the way I answer the corruption charges is this. In the last 30 years, we have implemented a development program that was approximately close to $400 billion worth. You could not have done all of that for less than, let's say, 350 billion. Now, if you tell me that building this whole country and spending 350 billion out of 400 billion, that we had misused or got corrupted with 50 billion, I'll tell you yes, but I'll take that any time. But more important, who are you to tell me this? I mean, I see every time all the scandals here or in England or in Europe. What I'm trying to tell you is, so what? We did not invent corruption. This happened since Adam and Eve. I mean, Adam and Eve were in heaven, and they had hanky-panky, and they had to go down to earth. So, I mean, this is human nature. But we are not as bad as you think.
So, the notion of investigating grand corruption, which is something that's endemic in the world, is something that today is so much easier with the internet, with this collaboration that's going on inside the industry, a collaboration that I welcome all of you to join, because it's also opening up new avenues and the ability to do stories that otherwise would not be possible. At Berkeley, at our investigative reporting program, for instance, We're doing a series of documentaries on the condition of the working people in America. This is involving Frontline PBS, it involves National Public Radio, it involves the Center for Investigative Reporting, which I helped found years ago, and it also involves Univision, a Spanish language network, and all of these stories appear at the same time. And I'll show you a tease for a story we did 2 years ago, which we're doing a sequel to now. It's called Rape in the Fields, and it's about the sexual assault of people that no one usually cares about. There are over 500,000 women working in the fields of America. Most are undocumented immigrants. This is a story about the price many women pay to keep those jobs and to keep food on our tables.
La persona que nos ofreció el trabajo le dijo a mi papá, no, pues no tengo trabajo para usted. Pero dijo, pero para sus hijas sí tengo trabajo. Entonces ya desde ahí empezó, cuando estábamos en el FIC, le empezaban a acosarnos horriblemente.
Nos miran como que ellos son los dueños de uno y que a la hora que ellos quieren tenerlo a uno, lo pueden tener.
No sé hablar inglés, no tengo papeles para trabajar. Así que, pues tengo que aguantar.
Ni el control, porque era un mayordomo, él era el que mandaba.
Una vez más, siguió y siguió y siguió.
Entonces, cuando no accedes, no tienes trabajo a la temporada que viene.
Todo el mundo tenía miedo. Pueden hacerme daño o hacer daño a mi familia.
They have lived in the shadows, unheard and unseen until now.
Él aprovechó para abusar de mí. Decir nada, no podía ni gritar porque es un trauma que no sabes ni cómo reaccionar.
And so as I mentioned, stories like this, stories which normally would have no one wanting to put them on national television, are now possible. And also another phenomenon is taking place. Most of these documentaries are usually made with philanthropic backing of foundations and individuals. But now, for the first time, Hollywood is getting involved. And the digital revolution is creating streaming of material. And the result is there is and I've seen it now and met it, a tremendous demand for nonfiction programming, a tremendous demand for documentaries, and the availability of investment money to make them. And it's something that I think is going to transform the way we make films, the way we report, and also our ability to control the content, defend it, and finally have a little ownership. So I welcome all of you to what I see as a turnaround that is taking place in the nonfiction and news industries, not just in the United States, but worldwide. I think we're finally going to come out of the question of what is the new model. And that new model will be with us, the creators, having quite a bit more power over what we produce and what we put out there. Thank you.
예, 헐리우드가 이런 공익적인 탐사 프로그램 제작에 참여하기 시작했다. 참 대단히 중요한 변화인 것 같습니다. 오늘 강연은 뭐 일반인들뿐만 아니라 언론을 공부하는 학생이라면 반드시 들어야 할 강연이었다라는 생각이 들고요. 또 현직 기자인 저도 기자로서의 자세를 가다듬게 하는 아주 명연설이었던 것 같습니다. 자, 오늘 강연 잘 들었습니다. 뭐 역시 여러분들 대신해서 제가 좀 더 한 발 더 들어가서 심도 있게 좀 질문을 좀 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 자, 먼저 질문을 드리기 전에요. 저희가 준비한 숫자가 하나 있죠. 먼저 좀 숫자를 좀 보실까요? 네, 숫자 굉장히 길군요. 6억 달러입니다. 6억 달러니까 우리 돈으로 치면 6천억 원이 넘는 어마어마한 돈인데 이 숫자의 의미는 뭘까요?
That's the amount of money that the tobacco industry spent every year on legal fees to stop people from publishing stories about their industry and the effect of their product.
매년 담배의 유해성을 보도되는 것을 막기 위해서 쓰는 법률 비용이다. 매년 6억 달러를 쓴다는 아주 충격적인 어마어마한 금액을 쓰고 있는데 이 정도라면 이런 사실을 보도를 통해서 알리는 것도 매우 어렵지 않을까라는 생각이 들고요. 이런 거대한 자본, 거대한 권력이 진실을 은폐하려고 할 때 저희 같은 언론인들은 과연 어떤 자세로 맞서야 할까요?
It's difficult.
Yeah.
In the case that I was involved in, CBS had just lost a $3 million libel suit to the same tobacco company. And in recent reporting that I've been doing about the Chinese gambling capital of Macau and the involvement of U.S. companies, one of the casino companies sued someone who came to the university and gave a talk for defamation. So it's very difficult. And what we look for are publishers and broadcasters who will stand up. And one of the reasons we have this nonprofit model, and by the way, there are now over 200 nonprofit investigative reporting groups in the world, about 150 of those in the US. And that's one of the things that's happened, is that bringing more entities together and also approaching the work as a public good, not necessarily as a commercial enterprise, is one way we can help defend it.
네, 이런 탐사보도 프로그램을 공공재로 보고 여러 분야의 협력과 협조를 통해서 프로그램을 제작해 나가는 방식을 취해 나가야 할 것이다. 자, 이런 얘기였는데요. 자, 좀 다른 질문 좀 하겠습니다. 조금 전에 혹시 CSI 앤서니 자이커의 강연을 들으셨을 텐데 CSI에 대한 다큐멘터리 프로그램도 제작을 하신 적이 있죠? 어떤 내용인가 좀 소개 좀 해주실까요?
Oh, no, we did a series of documentaries about forensic science for two reasons. One is DNA is a form of forensic tool, but turns out it's the only forensic science that's science.
Yeah.
And when you saw the cases where people were released from jail, and because of a wrongful conviction and because you could now produce DNA evidence, 60% of them involved forensic sciences that said they were guilty. Now, what are these sciences? Fingerprint matching, hair, fiber, and so on. It turns out there's no scientific basis for them and never has been. And the National Academy of Sciences in the United States did a report on it in 2008, and it said that. So we did a series of stories about that, and then who it is in the United States who actually decides how someone died suddenly or unexpectedly. And to our surprise, half of the people in the United States who do that are called elected coroners, and they may have a requirement of a high school diploma.
Yeah.
So it may help explain why in the United States, a third of all homicides are never cleared. 200,000 people have died in the United States in the last 40 years, and we don't know why. I'm talking about suspected murders.
예, 뭐 공식 기관의 발표라든지 정부 기관의 발표도 꼭 믿을 수 있을 것인가라는 데 대한 깨어있는 호기심 그리고 궁금증, 잘못된 것은 반드시 바로 잡아야 되겠다라는 이런 진실 추구의 자세가 아마 이런 끊임없는 탐사보도 열정의 바탕이 되지 않았을까 이런 생각이 드네요. 예.
And it's the difference between fiction and nonfiction. It's the difference between looking at something and looking at it from the point of view of what is hidden. What don't we know? What's behind the appearance? And so we assume, because of Sherlock Holmes and all kinds of fiction, that we really do have a scientific detective system out there that's working, at least in the United States. But when you look at it closely, it doesn't operate that way.
예, 뭐 예, 박수 한번 부탁드리겠습니다. 강연에서 스스로가 알 파치노보다 좀 더 잘생긴 것 같다 이런 말씀을 하셨죠. 굉장히 제 생각보다 젊어 보이시는데 1년이 넘으셨습니다. 이 버그만 교수님이요. 그런데 지금 1년이 넘도록까지 계속 탐사보도에 대한 호기심, 관심
The making.
예, 잃고 있지 않는 스스로의 원동력이라고 하면 화장 탐사보도에 대한 호기심을 잃지 않고 유지할 수 있는 비결이라 그럴까요? 뭐가 있을까요?
Well, for me, it's being able to get up in the morning and think of something I'm interested in. And as I found out after I'd been in the business about 3 or 4 years, I could actually get paid to do it. It was startling to me that you could actually get paid to go out and pursue your curiosity and try to find answers to questions. I woke up one day and I looked at my credit card and I said, how come they can charge me any interest rate they want? That became a movie, a series of articles, and really a revelation to a lot of people about how they actually work. So that never seems to stop. There's always some story or question that's out there. And what's interesting, what I'm encouraged about in terms of teaching and young people in the university and bringing that into the mix is that now we have the University of California, which is a research institution, getting interested in helping back us to do more work and produce more stories, and seeing young people interested in getting involved in this work despite the difficulties and despite the hassles.
예, 뭐 젊음도 유지하시고요, 돈도 벌고요, 그리고 사회에 좋은 일도 할 수 있는 일석삼조가 될 수 있는 우리 탐사보도 프로그램의 미래에 대해서 좋은 대담.
And I get to come to South Korea.
예, 곧 한국에도 오게 될 거라고 합니다. 자, 우리 로웰 버그만 교수님과의 좋은 대담이었습니다. 다시 한번 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 감사합니다. Thank you very much.